Hey folks, welcome. My name is Ash. I'm a member of the Firestorm Collective, and it's great to be here with you on the winter solstice to host tonight's event, Black Anarchism and Abolition, featuring a conversation between author and activist William C. Anderson and feminist scholar Robyn Maynard about Anderson's latest book, The Nation on No Map. For folks not familiar, Firestorm Books and Coffee is a 13-year-old worker-owned cooperative and radical bookstore in so-called Asheville, North Carolina, on the traditional lands of Cherokee people. We're a general interest bookstore, but are more well-known for our eclectic mix of titles related to feminism, anarchism, queerness, social movements, and other radical politics. We ship books all across the country and internationally. And if you haven't checked us out, our full catalog is available on our website, which I will drop links to in the chat and in the comments. Firestorm is also a community event space. However, since the start of the pandemic, we've transitioned entirely to an online virtual space and will continue hosting virtual events like the one you are attending tonight until it is otherwise safe to do so. We host lots of events in collaboration with folks like AK Press, who published William's book, and other indie publishers, and already have some pretty rad online reading groups scheduled for the new year. So if you're interested in staying informed about events happening through Firestorm, I'll also drop a link to our community calendar in the chat. Just a note for those attending in the live audience, there will be time at the end of tonight's conversation for Q&A. So if you're interested in asking a question at any point, I'll encourage you to submit them throughout the discussion by using the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen if you're attending on Zoom, or in the comments if you are following along on the Facebook live stream. And our speakers will do their best to respond. Cool. On to tonight's event. William C. Anderson's latest work, The Nation on No Map, examines state power, abolition, and ideological tensions within the struggle for Black liberation, while centering the politics of Black autonomy and self-determination. Amid renewed interest in Black anarchism among the left, Anderson offers a principled rejection of reformism, nation building, and citizenship in the ongoing fight against capitalism and white supremacy. As a viable alternative, he calls for the urgent prioritization of community-based growth, arguing that in order to overcome oppression, people must build capacity beyond the state. To introduce our panelists, William C. Anderson is a writer and activist from Birmingham, Alabama. He's the co-author of the book As Black as Resistance, also from AK Press, and is co-founder of Offshoot Journal. He also provides creative direction as one of the producers of the Black Autonomy Podcast, and his writings have been included in the anthologies Who Do You Serve, Who Do You Protect, and No Selves to Defend. William has also spoken before at Firestorm, and we are beyond excited to host him here again tonight, if only in virtual format. Joining in conversation tonight is Robyn Maynard, a Black feminist scholar based in Toronto. She's the author of Policing Black Lives, State Violence in Canada from Slavery to the Present. And she is the co-author of the forthcoming title, Rehearsals for Living, a text that explores the local and global dimensions of abolitionist and anti-colonial thought from Black and Indigenous feminist perspectives. Her work has also appeared in the Toronto Star, the Montreal Gazette, Scholar and Feminist, and has been translated into French and German. William, Robyn, Thank you so much for being here tonight. And I will go ahead and pass it over to Robyn.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ash. Thank you, Glenda, and the whole crew at Firestorm. I am really, really glad to be here with you, William. Before we start, I just want to say thank you for gifting us this book, for doing that abolitionist conjure work of helping us imagine Black futures based in old and new kinds of collective governance, of ways of making kinship in the absence of state surveillance, of policing, prisons, and borders, and the carceral state. You really gifted us a kind of vocabulary and way of thinking about collective liberation as limitless and expansive, and are daring really to think outside of some of the more prescriptive ways that we've been taught to think about Black struggle and what's possible. Before we jump into things, and really, I hope to just be using my role tonight to ask you questions that let you speak to the brilliant book that you've given us. But I know that you'd wanted to open with a little bit of a tribute before we begin our conversation on the nation with no map, and it's the solstice. So I thought I would light a candle for you while you do so.
Thank you so much for those kind words. It was really kind. Yeah, I did want to start with a small tribute. I wanted to pay homage to bell hooks to get this event started, and I appreciate you lighting the candle. I spoke and gave respect. I did a talk yesterday as well, and I spoke and gave respect to Russell Maroon Schultz, who also passed recently last night. Rest in peace to Russell Maroon Schultz as well. So I wanted to say something about bell hooks tonight. And so I want to read something that I wrote really quickly. I just want to send love, honor, and respect to the spirit of bell hooks. I also want to send love, sympathies, and compassion to her friends, family, and loved ones. This is a particularly hard time to lose someone because we're not even guaranteed one of the most basic remedies for loss, the ability to gather. Nothing is easy about a time where even crying together poses a risk. So if nothing else, I want to extend my most heartfelt thank you to bell hooks. She is someone who, no matter where I went in life, her words had radicalized and transformed those around me. No matter where people ended up, they had encountered her on their journey and sat with her words. That's an immeasurable impact. As a survivor, bell hooks gave me the words to understand my own experience. She didn't have to, nor did those I encountered who cannot be contained under feminism as a catch-all term. Her words speak to the legacy of unwaged care work that for many necessitates what some choose to call feminism in the first place. There's a systemic erasure that makes life-sustaining work unseen and minimizes its worth. Bell hooks helped me understand the importance of telling the whole story. How can I repay Bell for helping me recognize things that are unquantifiable? I want to take all of the lessons she gave us and put them towards practicing a priceless, revolutionary love. That's only just a start, but I promise to keep doing this until, at the very least, until I'm finished. So thank you, bell hooks.
Thank you so much. I appreciate just hearing that, the lifting up of all that invisible care work and love work that makes, something like Black feminism, that makes something like life possible. Bell hooks taught me how to love myself and helped me understand who to be mad at. And both of those things are an ongoing struggle, but it really helped to light that spark. I just wanted to read a quick quote of hers because I think it actually really ties in so much with what you're trying to do with the work, because it's some words of hers about the relationship between writing and the work that needs to be done in the world. So she says, theory is not inherently healing, liberatory, or revolutionary. It fulfills this function only when we ask that it do so and direct our theorizing toward this end. The possession of a term does not bring a process or practice into being. So that's something that really helps tie, I think, with me, the project of what you're trying to do with this book that you've given us, The Nation on No Map.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So, I mean, really just to open us up, I think I just want to thank you again for writing the book that I didn't know that I needed. I'm going to blow this out now. It's a gift to my past, present, and future self. You know, the 20-year-old baby radical that I once was starved for a book like this, trying to find and recuperate all of these legacies of different traditions of Black radicalism, including and especially Black folks within the tradition of Black anarchist thought and practice. So this book has found a welcome home with me, but also with so many countless readers already, at a time when many of us globally are engaged with principled study and practical experimentation and trying to imagine alternative ways of organizing human life. This book really helps us to do that. So before we jump into more of a Q&A, I know this is a personal favor and a kindness to me, and I thank you for indulging me in advance because I'd love you to open with a brief reading from the book.
Okay. I will do that. I'm gonna read from the chapter titled "The Great Return" on page 105. If anybody wants to turn with me, I grew up in the church, so I'm talking like I'm about to read scripture, which I'm not doing, definitely not doing. All right, in the United States, Black people are constantly being cycled around the country by the whims of capital. Gentrification is pushing families and entire communities to the brink, displacing people who have never known anything but the place they're being forced to leave. And much like the people abroad being forced to leave their home countries, those forcing Black people out here only see opportunity and profit. The great migration that dispersed Black America is being reversed, and new paths are being traveled by poor and working class people who can't afford to stay where they are. Black people are moving all around, again, many returning to the South. These are circumstances under which we must organize, abolishing the conditions that force us into movement and establishing networks of communities that will become the society we need. Since abolition requires us to create the future we desire through undoing, now is of the utmost importance. In 1943, Zora Neale Hurston documented in The Pet Negro System how the South was marked by its racist reputation, writing, quote, "It has been so generally accepted that all Negroes in the South are living under horrible conditions that many friends of the Negro up north actually take offense if you don't tell them a tale of horror and suffering," end quote. She describes a narrative that still persists today among many, including Black people who fear ever living in a conservative stronghold. Just as generations of Black people earlier sought respite from Southern apartheid in the North and West and found little, if any, Black people returning to the South are finding gentrification and other oppressive circumstances. As Malcolm X once told us, quote, "If you are Black, you are born in jail, in the North as well as the South," end quote. One thing is certain, there is no safety within the boundaries of empire, but perhaps safe havens can be found in its abolition. Traveling for extended periods of time makes one so worn and weary. We deserve more than a pit stop. We deserve a safe home. What home means has to take our current reality into serious consideration. The words of the poet Dion Brand can guide us well here. Quote, "Canadians and Americans who police these fresh borders materially as well as intellectually play and dwell in the same language of their conquest, a language which summons mystery and wilderness. Some of us want entry into the home and nation that are signified by these romances. Some of us in the diaspora long so for nation, some continuous thread of biological or communal association, some bloodline or legacy which will cement our rights in the place we live. The problem, of course, is that even if those existed, and they certainly do, even if it is in the human contraband which we represent in the romance, they do not guarantee nation for Blacks in the diaspora," end quote. As Zoe Samudzi and I explained in As Black as Resistance, it's important that we not try to establish anything, quote, "on top of centuries-old exterminatory settler logic of indigenous removal and genocide," end quote. Land and liberation must go beyond the idea that the nation state is a crucial precursor to actualize liberation. State building has had plenty of opportunities to show us all of its dangerous risks and problems, and we should not reproduce the systems of exclusion that have never accepted us. Thus, I'm certainly not arguing for inclusion in the current quote unquote R that people speak of when they say, quote, "our nation," end quote. Nor do I think that we should create a new quote unquote R, as in quote, "our nation," end quote. quote, our military, end quote, quote, our prisons, end quote, and so on. Mine is a call to dissolve and abolish these ideas within ourselves and around us. This can take us much further than trying to reshape horrible institutions for our own purposes.
Thank you. That's one of the most, for me, that's one of the most really resonant passages in the book. I'm glad that's the one you chose. Thank you so much. And that really leads us into the first question, where I just really want to offer you the chance to expand on some of these central ideas. I mean, something that I think really comes out with this book is that you were writing a book for us, you know, for Black people interested in and committed to liberation. Because of course the book speaks to the multiracial left, it speaks to different anti-authoritarian tendencies, but in particular, you're intervening into these histories of Black struggle, right? You're making interventions and interpretations and critiques of past and present struggles for Black liberation. So you're asking us to rethink taken for granted institutions like the nation state, and asking us to also contend with the possibilities or impossibilities of the struggle for citizenship that I think, you know, you really actually distilled so beautifully in the passage that you just read. So suggesting otherwise kinds of governance, other destination and end goals of freedom struggle, I want to invite you just to speak to some of these interventions that are so central to the book. Why does Black liberation need to be conceived of beyond the nation state formation? Why conceive of liberation, you know, outside of citizenship and the shackles of capitalism? And what does Black anarchism offer in their stead?
Yeah, it's definitely not about trying to bring Black anarchism into the canon. There's an issue with that reading of Black anarchism. One of the main reasons Lorenzo Gamboa Irvin had to write his foundational text, Anarchism and the Black Revolution, is because this black interpretation of anarchism was required because he had experienced racism at the hands of white anarchists, and that racism didn't magically disappear. Black anarchism doesn't absolve white anarchists; it indicts them. Yeah. So it's not a pet ideology for white anarchists to prove something that it's inclusive or it's diverse. But it also shouldn't be read as a more palatable anarchism for people who otherwise embrace authoritarianism and want to dismiss classical anarchism by weaponizing its historical failures around race. So Black anarchists have critiqued the statist and the anti-state left in terms of racism. This and its contradiction, all of the contradictions that exist there. So all of these limitations, that's why it's something for us to recognize can be, you know, a way to help us transcend conventional leftism altogether. All of these conventional leftisms that are tethered to tradition. Black anarchists really give us a real example of how to move beyond all of that and how to overcome it. So the nation state form, it fails people all around the world. And instead of pointing to state socialism or any other type of state, Black anarchism asks, why not? Why call for reform and more go-betweens when statelessness is what the ideal is supposed to be anyway? The absence of this form of violence. So, you know, think about like the police, for example. You know, we're having all of these conversations about abolishing the police, and there you've seen a mainstreaming of the abolition movement and the movement to abolish police and prisons in a very short amount of time since the uprisings that occurred last year. Mm-hmm. We know that the US police are exceptionally violent. And instead of looking around and saying, we need a country where the police are more like they are in this other country, because those police kill people less. Hopefully we can imagine a world free from policing altogether. You know what I'm saying? So the same analogy can really be applied to US imperialism and the state. Instead of getting trapped in this binary thinking that makes the world into good cops versus bad cops, let's talk about what cops actually do. What do states do? What do militaries do? You know, it's so much bigger and deeper than this simple good versus bad scenario that minimizes the complexity of the world. So, you know, also ask, what does capitalism in the free market form do versus state capitalism? You know, and some of us want no police and no borders and no militaries and no capitalism. So rather than trying to reform those things in the name of socialism and trying and hoping that the state will wither away, Black anarchism is throwing all of that into question. And for me, that's really transformative and actually, I think, much more radical than a lot of other things.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. It's really nice to have just different kinds of possibilities of governance and of organization presented, especially at a time where I think, as you highlighted, the imagination, you know, people's imagination is so ripe. The sudden ability for so many people around the world to start thinking about what could be a future without police, a future beyond policing and prisons. You know, at this time when we are really trying to imagine what else, I think that bringing into question also the idea of what else besides the nation, it's so crucial, and it's so really valuable that you're asking this at this time. Absolutely. So you'd mentioned Lorenzo Gamboa Ervin, and that sort of leads me into my next question, which is just wanting you to speak a little bit more about some of these historic legacies. Something that I think for many of us, you know, who are interested in engaging with Black anarchism and Black liberation, is really trying to do justice to some of the under-acknowledged people and thinkers who germinated the seeds for thinking about what it could mean to organize Black life and earthly life differently, outside of centralized authority, outside of capitalism. And I think there are so many of us that were, whether that was trained as scholars or as organizers, to be familiar with these histories of Black nationalism, of Garveyism. But Black radicalism has always been kaleidoscopic, right? There are other legacies, as you know, of thinking about and organizing toward and imagining Black freedom this whole time. So Black anarchism is in some ways some of this underthought and undercited and under-referenced kinds of thinking about what Black liberation could be. And your work counters this so beautifully, and you pay tribute to Black anarchist thinkers like Lucy Parsons, Kawasi Balagoon, Martin Sostre. I wonder if you could speak just a little bit about how some of these Black anarchist thinkers have informed your own work, your organizing, the ideas that are found in the nation on No Map.
Yeah, Lucy Parsons stands out for me first. I love Lucy Parsons. Lucy Parsons is a huge influence on my work. And she really kind of stands on her own. And she's really maybe a sort of proto-Black anarchism, because she doesn't come out of the Black Power or civil rights era like many contemporary Black anarchists do. Although she's talking about stateless socialism. She's talking about socialism from the bottom up, and she's doing it at the turn of the century. And this is a formerly enslaved Black woman who is, you know, when you read what Lucy Parsons was saying, she was, you know, I don't throw the term around fearless, but it seems like she was almost fearless, you know. She's so confrontational and so dynamic and prophetic in her words. A lot of the things that she's written and speeches that she gave, those things still speak to this moment. I would actually encourage people too to go read. I have a quote in the book about voting. I think it's from The Ballot Humbug, but definitely read what Lucy Parsons has to say about voting and electoralism. It's timeless, and it's definitely relevant right now with a lot of the discussions that are being had. Martin Sostre was Lorenzo Gamboa Ervin's mentor. He was a giant. He almost single-handedly transformed US prison conditions by himself. And there's certainly a case, I think, to be made that he was probably one of the most impactful prison revolutionaries in the history of the United States. And so one of the things that's become really important for me is trying to highlight the history of his life. we just started an account on Twitter actually called the Social Institute, where we're releasing through Offshoot Journal, we're releasing his writings. Shout out to Garrett Felber for helping with that, who's working on the biography of Martin Sostre. But there's so much there that needs to be talked about and discovered, because Martin is gone largely unnoticed. A lot of people don't know who he is. They don't know much about him. And he's responsible for so many of the rights and reforms that were granted to people in prison. And he has a life that really shows the trajectory that I'm talking about in this book. He was a Black nationalist. He was a member of the Nation of Islam. And he, had encounters with SNCC. He had encounters, in the civil rights movement with other organizations. And, he was also close to the Black Power movement. And he was in the midst of a lot of uprisings. And he started had a radical bookstore, and ended up getting framed by the police. They targeted him because of his Black radicalism. Mm-hmm. And at the time, he had definitely embraced a lot of different politics, including different forms of socialism, and he ends up at anarchism. That trajectory that he went through in his life is really something I'm trying to trace in this text in my own way and in my own life. And definitely encourage people to learn as much as possible about Martin. And Kuwaisi's another person who, the fire he brings is really his new African perspective, which challenges the notion and the idea of citizenship and trying to conform or fit in. So Kuwaisi Balagoon, lots of respect for everything, and just all of the Black anarchists historically who have paved the way for me to be able to write this text and try to highlight the things that they've done, the ways that they put their lives on the line and suffered abuse, injury, imprisonment, and more just to get these words out. I think it's really important that we give them their due respect.
Absolutely. And that comes out so closely. I think that love and that deep respect for these legacies is something that, that the book does so powerfully. It closing with the words of Lorenzo Gamboa Urban is, I think, really powerful for that as well. He closes it by saying, "We're here and we ain't going nowhere. We will continue to innovate, critique, organize, and write about the ideals of radical anarchism." And I just think that's a great way. And then he says, This is what you're hearing from William C. Anderson, one of the best young Black anarchist writers and thinkers. You better appreciate him." Great way to close off this text as well, because you have this intergenerational, mutual appreciation back and forth, right? So I just think that that's something, those living legacies of people who are still with us. And of course, those who are ancestors now. But I think that really comes through.
Absolutely.
Shining through in the text. So thank you for that.
Sure.
So I want to ask you to speak a little bit about, there's something I think really special about the way that you write about what I would call radical solidarity and Black anarchism in the book. So just as sort of by way of prefacing my question, there's an old comrade and I who used to joke together about, the difficulties of thinking about anarchism as Black folks, as South Asian folks in autonomous movements, and sometimes thinking about this idea of anarchism without the anarchists, right? Which is a way of just feeling frustrations of some of the paternalistic tendencies that are found sometimes in predominantly white anarchist movements and spaces that sometimes can be crunchy political homes in this way. Often because there is some tendencies, and again, I don't want to characterize a whole movement for this, but sometimes a tendency to have sort of a disdain for third world liberation movements, for African and Caribbean anti-colonial struggle, for Palestinian struggle, for Indigenous struggle, because it takes the form of what's considered national struggle, right? And this always felt a certain kind of wrongness for me, because, what's the point of a politic so narrow that it can't fathom other ways of organizing against, some of the terrors of racial capitalism and colonialism and all the forms that takes. So it always just felt like a kind of arrogance or entitlement that we can't necessarily afford as Black folks living here, and thinking about what it would mean to be free. So you write in the book that thinking with Balagoon on what you say, granting people the right to choose their own forms of rebellion. And then you quote his words to say, it is not only racism, but compliance with the enemy to stand outside of the social arena and permit America to continue to practice genocide against the third world captive colonies, because although they resist, they don't agree with us. So this to me seems like you're highlighting what you're calling Black anarchism is expansive rather than doctrinary or this narrow prescription of what politics needs to be. And it radiates outwards in this way. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how Black anarchism, the way that you're theorizing it, allows us for this kind of generous multiplicity in the ways that we're able to think about Black struggle and all the kinds of struggle that are happening around us right now, from Wet'suwet'en to Palestine. And how does this radicalize how we can think about and practice solidarity?
Yeah, white anarchist spaces have failed a lot in the past and in the present in this regard. There are plenty of people in the world who would not agree with me. And I don't put myself in position to speak for anyone or any community that I don't live in or that I don't struggle in. Solidarity isn't me speaking over people for the sake of ideological promo. The last thing I want to do is be out here proselytizing and using other people's lives to do it. So I believe in supporting people's self-determination, but I do not conflate people and states. I don't do that. You hear folks say, quote unquote, the people, but everywhere is made up of different people with different priorities. And something we have to understand is that solidarity has to give respect to unique circumstances. And unique conditions that everybody experiences based on where they're at. So to me, part of what Black autonomy really means is allowing the complexity of the world to exist without turning entire populations into a homogenous mass that all wants the same thing, and anyone who doesn't want that thing is counter-revolutionary, So the world is it's never been that simple to me. And there are people in the world who have all sorts of ideas and models for their lives that I may or may not believe in, or that I may not want for my own life. And that's fine. So if people are being harmed or killed or disenfranchised that I have solidarity with, that's a completely different thing. That's a completely different situation. So I think that one of the things I'm trying to say is that with regard to the left, that geopolitics is not a game, and you cannot cast this wide net over what the world should look like based on your ideological whims. And people need to be very careful about this and very thoughtful about this, because our words have an effect in this regard, and we have to be really compassionate and really understanding that our feelings ideologically and our politics are not something that we can just cast and throw on to populations and determine things for other people who we're not on the ground struggling with. So that's how I tend to think about this.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer. Thinking about being in solidarity with people and not states, I think really is a helpful way for framing what that looks like, right? To be in support of people fighting against oppression globally, regardless of the different forms that takes. I think that's something that comes out really, really gorgeously in this text. So I think you formulated something that's going to be resonating for a long time with me because of that. So there's something else that I'd wanted to ask you. I wanted to invite you to speak more to the commune. You wrote, under conditions, Black people's experience, the idea of creating liberated zones comes to the forefront of many people's minds. In various revolutionary traditions in the past, I'm just reading from your words, liberally tonight. In various revolutionary traditions in the past, this has meant attempting to build the commune. The commune hasn't just been a whimsical utopian idea. It's been a necessity for Black people seeking something different. And I'd love to hear you speak a little bit more about this. You talk so much about placelessness and this constant shifting, and I feel like this presents this alternative way of thinking about life and staying put in movement.
Yeah, you know, a lot of this text is about movement and migration and home and belonging and citizenship. All of those things inform my my feelings around Black anarchist politics. And I want to just like say, you know, rest in peace again to Russell Maroon Schultz. I brought this up last night, but I'm going to bring it up again now. I don't reference him in the book, but I want to bring up the importance of his work since he just passed, because he did influence me, and I was reading him a lot when I was writing this book. One of the things he says, he went in the text, The Dragon and the Hydra. One of the things that he says is that, you know, he's making this analysis, he has this analysis of organizational methods. And he says that he, you know, rejects this sort of top-down Marxist-Leninist vanguardism, using the history of these projects turning into fratricidal violence and supremacy over the working class itself. He uses that to kind of reject that as something that we should continue doing. And so he has this analysis based on his 50 years in the movement, and he encourages radicals to use decentralized anarchic strategies that draw from Black history of revolt throughout the Americas, you know, specifically with regard to Maroons and the uprisings against enslavement. And he stresses this point that decentralization is a great way of holding off attacks, but it also he also emphasizes autonomy as well, and the way that it helps helps people maintain autonomy to approach things that way. So rather than trying to squeeze everyone together under the mandate of like a vanguard or a national party, you know, that's not how I conceive liberation. And that's the opposite of what allowing communities their own autonomy to govern themselves looks like. So when we look at the history of these formations and then look to the present, and we think about somebody like the MOVE organization that I reference in the text, as well as other radical autonomous formations from, you know, the past to the present, Black people were trying to break free from state terror and white supremacist violence. And Black autonomy has a rich historical legacy of collectives and groups trying to forge new ways of living beyond the nation and beyond the state. But rather than just survive and neglect the state, I'm asking to actually envision us building networks and trying to connect these sorts of efforts to have a global movement based on the revolutionary intercommunalism of the Black Panthers. So that's not the same as nationalism. Intercommunalism is really something completely different, and that's based on the survival programs and the work that the Panthers were doing. But Huey Newton started theorizing something that I think challenges a lot of, again, that conventional approach to Black nationalism and radical politics on the left traditionally. So I say the commune doesn't have to be called the commune, because it doesn't. Things are going to look different for everyone based on their own conditions. But I'm just thinking about the role that is played historically in influencing how we think about radical politics on the left.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thinking with Huey P. Newton in particular with this, you know, with this book, I think creates a really good, compelling sort of otherwise way of thinking about, of thinking about what it means to think about collective kinds of governance, to think about non-hierarchical, non-domination oriented governance, and actually beginning to trace those legacies and to trace those legacies globally is something I think that's really powerful. And that's actually something that I'd wanted to also ask you about, just in terms of history and the way that we mobilize history differently to help ourselves understand freedom, and the way that you do that in this text. So you write that intentional misremembering can affect the present. And you quote Fanon, who says, In no way should I dedicate myself to the revival of an unjustly unrecognized Negro civilization. I will not make myself the man of any past. I do not want to exalt the past at the expense of my present and my future. And this is something that makes me think too with Saidiya Hartman's Lose Your Mother. This idea that even as we have to reckon with all that's been lost and all that's been destroyed, is also the importance of not romanticizing all pre-colonial organizing of human life, for example, on the African continent. Something that you do here, as well as with Zoe Samudzi in his Black as Resistance, is, refusing this legacy of the African kings and queens, and, by extension, naturalizing the forms of domination that accompanied this. So at the same time, your work, even with the previous answer that you provided, also recenters the important histories of communal societies, of stateless structures in and across pre-colonial Africa that were not reliant on non-hierarchical authorities. So these rememberings too, they help to ground us, right? They help to remind us that there's nothing natural and there's nothing trans-historical about hierarchical domination-centered forms of governance, that much else has been possible and much more is possible. So the question is sort of, how do we reach ethically back through time in this way that we're trying to recover these stolen legacies of ancestors that we haven't yet accounted for, but without misremembering or without becoming so attached to what has been lost that we fail to refashion new presents and new futures. I think there's something that's so much between the lines of your text, is an anarchic way, if you will, of using the past and of mobilizing the past. So could you speak a little bit about the uses of history, the risks and possibilities of mobilizing histories of Black struggle to inform more liberatory presents and futures?
Yeah, and I think this ties into again to Russell Maroon Schultz and looking at that history as a way of finding anarchic struggle in those maroon formations. That I think that's related to this as well. I'll say, history is filled with trial and error and victory and atrocity, on all fronts. And the entire time I've been on the left, the narratives I've seen about what constitutes radicalism have centered state socialism and nation building. Mm-hmm. You have a revolution, you defeat the oppressors, you have a new government, happily ever after, kind of like is the story that you hear predominantly on the left. And I didn't know that there was more than one type of socialism when I was younger. So I'm writing this now, especially for young people, to know that all of this history is not pretty, and we shouldn't be overly romantic about this history. It's very messy, and it's filled with just as much death and destruction and betrayal and compromise as you would find as, with regard to victory and things that there are to celebrate. Mm-hmm. So coming up, and that was really something that I encountered a lot, was that romantic relationship with the past, overly romantic relationship with the past. And it's still this way. It's still this way to a very large extent. It was like anything that was critical of nationalism and state socialism and electoralism even, and how they all carry the potential for state violence in them, made you a cop or a counter-revolutionary or a fed for, offering any sort of question or criticism with regard to those logics. And so it was like, you're just supposed to like fall in line and never question these things. And so for me, it's like, look, you can't learn from the past and from losses that took place in the past, from failures that took place in the past, when you won't even acknowledge that they existed. How do you learn from something that didn't go right if you won't even say that it failed, if you won't even acknowledge the failure? So these fairy tales that turn disasters into triumph and, make infallible gods of men of the past, it weakens our movements, and it weakens our struggle. And so I'm trying to push back against that so that we can have, so that I can encourage others who maybe aren't thinking about things that way, that this is a way for us to actually have stronger movements, stronger formations, and actually have better politics. That if we challenge all of this overzealous veneration and this just strong nostalgia that exists on the left, that it's a better way for us to recognize our present failures because we are not so obsessed with the past that we're distracted from seeing what's going wrong right now in the present moment. So, that doesn't make somebody a counter-revolutionary for asking those questions. I think that it's like, the people will say, like, this sort of questioning means that there's something wrong, that you're challenging the orthodoxy, that you must be an informant, or you must be against the movement. But it's like, when I look at the US left, I'm like, you may not even be the threat that you think that you are, because there's plenty of weakening happening from within the left because of this sort of rationale and this sort of logic that people have around these sorts of things. So that's really how I'm thinking about history in the past. But that goes across the spectrum. That goes for people who are thinking about electoral politics in that way, and they're trying to be included in the state. They're trying to access citizenship and say we can fix this system from the inside out. That goes for people who are saying we need a new state, we need to seize this state and reform it into a new revolutionary state. And as well as nation building and Black nationalism, thinking about if we blacken this project, or have a Black project that's our own, that it'll be inherently better. So I'm thinking about all of that in those terms.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. And yeah, there's also what you and Zoe highlight in the Black as Resistance about what does it mean to build, for example, a Black nation in a context where we live in a place of ongoing Indigenous genocide, right? What does that mean in terms of solidarity with Indigenous people facing active colonial violence at this time as well? And I think that's something that your work also really speaks beautifully to, and sort of helps us reconceive of histories and historical responsibilities differently. So in speaking with, I guess, what it means to push back against veneration, I think that something that's really powerful in the text that resonates loudly is the critique of Black capitalism and the critique of celebrity. So, thinking, of course, of Bell Hooks' passing and how slammed she was, for example, for criticizing Beyonce, thinking about Beyonce and Jay-Z, keeping blood diamonds, for example, more recently. So why to you did it feel really crucial at this time to push against celebrity at different levels as a way of, a weakening, as you say, of our movements?
Well, I've just been feeling that way for a long time, because just being an organizer and being in movements, just being on the ground, and a lot of times as an activist, you see all these different situations where, you're working and you're doing all of this, you're putting in all of this effort to build something. And celebrities just come in, they show up, and they're like automatic experts. You see them called to speak on the news or to come to, events, and they are given this sort of glory because of their fame that for a lot of people translates to expertise. And I talk in the book, I write about, leader celebrities as well as celebrity leaders. And what I mean by that is the way that celebrities and famous people who may be an entertainer or someone who's famous for something completely unrelated to a movement can be made into a leader just because they're famous. But also activists and organizers and people within movements become famous and they gain proximity to the establishment in that way. And then all of a sudden you see them become compromised and you see the direction change. And because of the way that we think about leadership historically, people follow behind compromised people and follow the direction of these compromised people who are able to lead people in a way, in direction that is counter-revolutionary and that is limiting for movements. So I think that it's really important to challenge the idea of the traditional ideas of messianic and charismatic leadership because of the dangers of that and the ways that people can be misled because of that. Definitely drawing from Ella Baker here, who told us everything that we need to know about all of the dangers of just following a charismatic leader and buying into fame too much. So I was thinking about that with regard to the way that, people kind of refer to celebrities as, as kings and queens, and when people are big fans, they refer to celebs as kings and queens. And I was thinking about that when I was actually trying to formulate a good rejection of that sort of hierarchical way of appreciating someone.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, all of that romanticization historically of kings and queens and of monarchy and of aristocracy and nobility and all of that, even in an African context, I think feeds into a sort of Black capitalism that we see reinforced today by the celebrity class and by movement people who become celebrity leaders and also reinforce it. So I hope that made sense. I just jumped all over the place.
That makes sense to me, and I hear you. I think it's a valuable critique, and it comes up in different ways throughout the text. So yeah, it's good to hear you speak a little bit more to that. So I recognize we're getting close to where we want to give a chance for a Q&A. So maybe just if the one last thing I would ask of you is, I was going to read this, but I actually really want you to read Gwendolyn Brooks's poem that you quoted in the introduction, which is where you got the title of the book, A Nation with No Map. If you could just read that and speak to how this understanding is central to you, to building abolitionist futures, to the work that you're trying to do.
Yeah, I can read it. Did you want me to read the whole poem or just that quote? Because I'm pulling it up right now.
I would definitely have you read the whole poem if you have it. But you can also read the quotes, the quote in the book, whichever you're more comfortable with. But
I'll listen. I told you I was going to do whatever you wanted, so
right.
I will read the whole thing.
Okay.
This is the poem "The Blackstone Rangers" by Gwendolyn Brooks, as seen by sorry, hold up a second. All right. There they are, 30 at the corner, black, raw, ready, sores in the city that do not want to heal. The leaders, Jeff, Jean, Geronimo, and Bob. They cancel, cure, and curry, hardly the dupes of the downtown thing, the cold bonbon, the rhinestone thing, and hardly in a hurry. Hardly, Belafonte, King, Black Jesus, Stokely, Malcolm X, or Rap, bungled trophies. Their country is a nation on no map. Jeff, Jean, Geronimo, and Bob. In the passionate noon, in the bewitching night, are the detailed men, the copious men. They curry, cure, they cancel, canceled images whose concerts are not divine, vivacious, the different tens, and intent are intense last entries, pagan argument, translations of the night. The Blackstone bitter burrows, bureaucracy is footloose, edit, fuse, unfashionable damnations and dissent, an exulting monstrous hand on monstrous hand, construct strangely a monstrous pearl or grace. Gang girls, a rangerette. Gang girls are sweet exotics. Mary Ann uses the nutrients of her Orient, but sometimes sighs for cities of blue and jewel, beyond her ranger rim of Cottage Grove. Bowery boys, disciples, whipbirds will dissolve no margins, stop no savory sanctities. Mary is a rose in a whiskey glass. Mary's, February's shudder and are gone. April's, fret frankly, lilac hurries on. Summer is a hard, irregular ridge. October looks away. And that's the year. Save for her bugle love. Save for the bleat of not obese devotion. Save for somebody terribly dying under the philanthropy of Robins. Save for her ranger bringing an amount of rainbow and a string drawn bag. Where did you get the diamond? Do not ask, but swallow straight the spirals of his flask and assist him at your zipper, pet his lips, and help him clutch you. Love's another departure. Will there be any arrivals, confirmations? Will there be gleaning? Mary, the shake dancer's child, from the rooming flat, pants carefully, peers at her laboring lover. Mary Ann, settle for sandwiches, settle for stocking caps, for sudden blood, aborted carnival, the props and niceties of non-loneliness, the rhymes of leaning. And that's the Blackstone Rangers by Gwendolyn Brooks.
Thank you.
So you wanted me to kind of talk about why I chose that line from that poem?
Yeah, even just to speak to briefly, I think that's the whole poem is so beautiful. It actually gives a really great context to it. And, you know, the words that you pulled from it, I think are so powerful within the context of the poem. And I guess I just wonder, yeah, if you would just even elaborate briefly about what that meant to you and what that means about Black anarchism for you.
Well, the Blackstone Rangers were the gang that ultimately became known as the Black Keystone Nation. And when she is referencing the leadership and she talks about Jeff, Jean, Geronimo, and Bob, and says that their country is a nation on no map, I'm a huge fan of poetry. I read poetry almost every day as a practice. But when I read that line, and I actually read it some years ago, and then I was reading it again when working on As Black as Resistance. It's actually in there too, in the self-defense chapter, I want to say. But when I read that line, it stuck out to me because of the way that it informs a lot of what I'm trying to say about statelessness and citizenship and nationhood. Because this formation is not recognized as an official nation, although it is a nation. And I started wondering what it would mean to be a part of a nation that doesn't have to be a nation and that doesn't have to be on a map, that exceeds those things and has a politicized intention around thinking beyond those things. So I think that Gwendolyn Brooks just summed that up perfectly in that, just in that one line in that poem. And that's the great thing about poets, is that they can, in one line, sum up what takes somebody like me an entire book to say. So.
Yeah, I hear you. Listen, I could speak with you all evening, and I hope to get to do so again one of these days. But I also just want to acknowledge that there are plenty of people here that have, likely so many questions for you. So I just wanted to close out, my end really of speaking, of just reading the last paragraph of Saidiya Hartman's foreword to your book, because I think it just summarizes it really well for me. So I'm just going to read briefly from this. And then I'll offer you really any final words, and then we can really just jump into this Q&A, because I know that there is so much more that folks are going to want to speak with you too about this. So she writes, anarchism is the inheritance of the dispossessed, the legacy of slaves and fugitives, toilers and recalcitrant domestics, secret orders and fraternal organizations. It is the history that arrives with us as those who exist outside the nation, as the stateless, as the dead, as property, as objects and tools, as sentient flesh. In meeting the heinous violence of the colony and the plantation, we have resisted, we have battled, we have fought to defeat our oppressors. We have struggled to live and survive. In this protracted war, we have created networks of mutual aid, maroon communities, survival programs, and circles of care. We are Black in anarchy because of how we have lived and how we have died. We are Black in anarchy. The nation on no map illuminates the potentiality that resides there.
Beautiful. Well, I thank you for reading that. I think that I'll just start pulling up some questions here. So let's see. The first question is from Timothy, and Tim knows me. Tim is somebody who was around when I was in the immigrant rights movement, doing a lot of organizing work there. And Tim is asking, with regard to when we were deep in this immigration work, and now with the focus on abolition and anti-imperialism and anti-capitalism, Tim would like to ask how much that experience in immigration has shaped my abolitionist thinking. Yeah, I could talk about that for another hour. So that's a big question. But I will say pretty quickly that abolition and first, citizenship is where I should start. When I was in the immigrant rights movement, the mainstream immigrant rights movement has a pretty strong focus on access to citizenship as a way of trying to, have a goal around integrating people into the society and resolving a lot of the tensions that people face because of non-citizen status. So one of the things that I try to point out in this text is that citizenship is actually something that doesn't guarantee us much, because, when you're thinking about things as a Black person in the United States, one, I'm arguing that Black people experience a sort of statelessness despite having, being supposed to have this form of citizenship. That doesn't protect us from something like extrajudicial violence that we experience at the hands of police. I'm a citizen of the United States, but I can be killed by a police officer just because they feel like it or they want to at any moment. Citizenship doesn't protect me from that. And so that made me critical of the way that the immigrant rights movement was approaching the largely having this goal, this what I felt was an overemphasis on citizenship and getting people that as a means to trying to try to ultimately help people who didn't have status. So it made me thoughtful about that, but it also made me think about how that plays into a more global context of Black people who are moving across the world throughout the Americas, who are going around trying to find a place to call home, not just in the United States, but all throughout the world, and how borders and states actually make this crisis so much worse with regard to forced movement. And so that for me throws a lot into crisis and makes me rethink, made me rethink statism altogether. So that's how it informs my perspective around abolition. So I'm gonna do a couple more because I know that we're already a little over time. Just do 2 more. So, so somebody asked if I could talk more about recommendations and finding community, particularly in a pandemic. I'll just read this. I so appreciate tonight's offering, and I'm looking forward to receiving my copy of the book. I'm neither scholar nor organizer, and with the time I have left, after laboring, personally struggling to find movements, I wanted to work with people that feel welcome or that I align with where I am in so-called Canada. Any recommendations in finding community, especially in this pandemic moment? That is, that's a complicated question. I feel like one of the best things to do is, and this is just from my perspective, I think that one of the best things to do is to get to know the people that are around you. I think that one of the things that we can learn from the uprisings that occurred last year, as well as the uprisings that have occurred in previous years prior to the pandemic, is, sometimes we saw people kind of engaging in this sort of like movement tourism and jumping all around and going to different places where there were uprisings happening. And I think that it's good to get to know the people in your community who are living around you and build strong relationships with them, because a lot of the things I'm talking about in this text, a lot of the things I'm advocating for require us to actually have intimate, close relationships with the people around us and to know who we're living around, and not just only seek community with people who share ideology or politics with us, who may be on the other side of the state or the other side of the country or whatever the case may be. I think it's important to actually try to build with people around us and get to know what people's needs are and talk about what our needs are and try to find community that way, without being overly idealistic about any of this. So I don't know if that answers the question well, but that's just off of the top of my head. So let's see. What is land for the nation on no map? What does it mean to reclaim land? These questions are still coming in. I'm sorry, it just moved right when okay. So what does it mean to reclaim land absent state formation, but as a part of self-determination? What is land for the nation on no map? So I think that is a conversation that is actually going to have to respect different people's relationships to the land. So one of the things that you brought up, Robyn, was, me saying, or in as Black as Resistance, us saying that, you can't just create some new formation or create a new state on top of settler colonialism and its violence, and then just act like it it doesn't exist. I think that it happens with respect to the people who are around you. And there were different relationships that people have to land. So with that being said, I mean, I think that it has everything to do with what I was talking about before. I can't give an overarching answer of what the land is going to mean to different communities and different people. I think that's something that's going to be decided by giving respect to autonomy and to history with the different ways it takes shape across this country and with different people. So yeah, I think that might be the last question I'm gonna take. I think we're over time. What do you think, Robyn? You think that's good? Ash, anybody?
Yeah, we can let you take it from here, Ash. But I just want to, you're also on mute, but I just want to say thank you so much for answering all those questions and just for really sharing so much of your brilliance with us today. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Robyn, thank you for coming with all your just incredible questions for William tonight. And William, thank you for sharing all of your insight. I think this has been a really beautiful and complete event. I really appreciated the way you started off with that tribute to bell hooks. So just really want to appreciate you both taking the time to be here tonight. Also, we had over 100 people in attendance tonight. I think that's by far the most we've had for an event at Firestorm. So many thanks to everybody who was in attendance and for bringing your very insightful questions to this discussion as well. So yeah, for folks who haven't gotten a copy of the book yet, The Nation on No Map, I dropped links to it in the chat there. A really essential read for this moment. So I do hope that folks check it out. And some of the power of this moment as well is that we can get together in totally different places and totally different sides of the continent. But it would also be great in the future sometime for us all to find ourselves in the same place. And hopefully we can get together sometime and have a chat in person. But until then, thanks for doing this, and thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for writing this book, William.
And thank you, Robyn. I appreciate you. Thanks, Ash.
Excellent. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Goodbye now.